This is not. This isn't anything to punish Venezuela for election interference. This is about oil, gas, gold, and other rare earth minerals. This is about bringing Venezuela once again under the control of the U.S. financial sector so that Venezuela would be compelled to share its wealth with the United States. Now, Trump has run into some problems. Yeah, the CIA is actively and has been actively working, trying to bribe military officers as they successfully did back in 2003, prior to the invasion of Iraq, where senior Iraqi military officers were basically paid off not to perform. So far, it looks like the CIA has not had any success on that front because the Venezuelan military understands exactly what's afoot. This isn't about democracy or election integrity. It's about who controls the wealth beneath the soil. What Larry Johnson is revealing is a pattern we've seen for decades. When a nation like Venezuela resists financial absorption, pressure shift, diplomacy to covert influence and then to force if needed. The irony is this: the more openly these tactics are repeated, the less effective they become. The world is learning the playbook, and once that happens, power based on manipulation begins to expire. This is not about promoting democracy. And I'm not here to suggest that, Hugo Chavez or Maduro, Vicente Maduro, were, great beacons of democracy and protectors of human rights. But there's also always a context that U.S. efforts to portray it as a one-sided, abuse by Venezuelans ignores the role that the United States played overtly and covertly in trying to undermine, that government. The United States faces a real challenge now. It has deployed significant military forces off the coast of Venezuela. This isn't a clean morality play. Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro were no democratic saints. But neither is the United States an innocent bystander in Venezuela. Years of now visible military force mean this crisis was engineered long before the ships arrived. And once fleets are in position, diplomacy quietly runs out of time. It has conducted, in my view and in my opinion, an illegal attacks on boats that they claim are carrying drugs. I would simply note, just to use your logic with respect to the very first boat that the United States destroyed more than a month and a half ago. It was a 60-foot boat with 4 outboard motors, described as a cigarette boat, but it wasn't like your conventional cigarette boat. It was actually open, not closed over. Had 11 people on board. Now, the range of that boat is here. It is supposedly smuggling drugs to the United States. Except this boat only has a capacity to go 250 miles before it would need to be refueled. And, the distance from the carrying fuel on board. There wouldn't be any room for drugs. If a boat can't physically reach the United States from Venezuela on a single fuel load, then the drug smuggling claims stops being intelligence and starts looking like justification. When math contradicts narrative, narrative usually bends to power. That's when enforcement quietly turns into escalation. Number 1. Because the number of jerry cans that would be required to be hauled be significant. And this is not a boat with the kind of creature comfort you'd need for a 1,300-meter journey. Do have to stop and go to the bathroom. You do want to get something to eat once in a while. So this is not a boat for that kind of operation. Is there a lot of smuggling activity that goes on down in that part of the world? Yes, absolutely. Cigarettes, liquor, other electronic items. Yeah, there is a lot of smuggling, but given my experience working with operation forces, starting and actively scripting exercises in 1994, I saw hundreds, really more than 200 examples of rules of engagement for possible operations. I never saw a single authorization to attack a boat just because we believed there were bad people on it carrying drugs. The proper way to handle that is you stop the vessel. If in the course of stopping the vessel then opens fire and attacks U.S. forces, then you blow the boat away. But I base this on conversations with Coast Guard enlisted and officers. Most of the time when the Coast Guard would make these stops, they'd board the boats, and if they discovered contraband, illegal drugs, they'd seize the drugs and arrest the crew, and then they would be given a chance to cooperate or go to prison. That's the right way to do it. Just killing extrajudicial killings without any kind of due process. This is the quiet line being described here is a shift from due process to destruction, from boarding and arrest, as the United States Coast Guard traditionally does, to preemptive killing. When suspicion alone becomes enough to justify force, the rule of law doesn't bend, it disappears. And once that line is crossed, no operation is ever truly controlled again. It may feel good, but it's wrong and it's evil. And Donald Trump, right now, is trying to make an issue of there have been 6 members of Congress. At least one of them is, a retired naval officer. And, they basically called upon U.S. military personnel. If you're given an order to go out and kill people on boats that have not threatened to kill you, they haven't said it this explicitly, but this is the essence of what they're saying. They're calling upon U.S. military to disobey those orders. That is an unlawful order. I would argue it is an unlawful order and that those personnel should refuse to carry it out. But unfortunately, we've got too many sheep in the U.S. military. When unquestioned obedience becomes a virtue, morality becomes optional. What's being implied here is dangerous. That illegal force should be followed simply because it's ordered. Even under Donald Trump, the oath of the United States military is to the Constitution, not to any one leader. History shows us this clearly. Every great atrocity begins when soldiers stop asking whether an order is lawful and start asking only whether it is authorized. The urgency about trying to carry out a military operation against Venezuela is running into problems. Number 1. When you alert the size of military forces, and try to keep them actively engaged, their readiness level declines over time. That's number one. As I've commented on other podcasts, I saw, the invasion of Panama in December of 1989. Even before we did that, there had been efforts by the CIA to both entice, suborn members of Nori's government to turn against him, as well as to create incidents that would, provoke a response. Keeping forces on constant alert against Venezuela doesn't sharpen readiness, it erodes it. We saw the same slow slide into war with Manuel Nura in Panama. Long pressure, staged provocations, then an invasion driven by momentum, not strategy from the Panamanians, that then we could use to justify, attacking. And I saw this firsthand. The Panama analyst sat right behind me, in my cubicle at CIA, and she was very actively involved in getting briefed by the DO what they were doing. Because this was an organized effort to overthrow a guy that we had recruited that had been run by the CIA. Manuel Noriega had been a CIA asset, evil bad guy that just came out of nowhere. Well, we're trying to do the same thing in Venezuela, but with not much success. And I'm sure there are at least some smart people at the Pentagon, at Southern Command, that can look at a map and realize Venezuela is a country that's twice the size of a rock. It is a country filled with mountains, tropical jungle, tropical rainforest, very difficult terrain to traverse, with rivers, wetlands, swamps. So if you go back and compare our operation in Iraq in 2003 with 130,000 troops, even though the United States took control of Baghdad fairly quickly, within 5 to 6 weeks, it did not quail or control the population. Civil order broke down, and the Iraqis started an insurgency. This is the blind spot of power. Manuel Noriega was once a Central Intelligence Agency asset, then became the enemy. Now, wars. We overran Baghdad in weeks during the Iraq War and still lost control of the country. Toppling a leader is easy. Controlling what follows is where empires usually fail. In my judgment, if the United States were to try a similar operation in Venezuela, we would face a far more severe and lethal insurgency by different guerrilla elements in Venezuela and those who had come from Colombia and from Brazil. The other thing to recognize, though, is unlike the 130,000 troops we had mobilized that entered Iraq in March 2003, right now we only have 18,000 troops, mostly Marines, parked off the coast of Venezuela. That is, that force is not big enough or strong enough or capable enough to enter Venezuela and take control of key roads, key sites. In fact, it's worth noting that Venezuela military then come out and attack and destroy U.S. targets and U.S. personnel. The fact of the matter, that Venezuela is twice as large as Iraq, and that they actually don't have a force comparable but to what we used in Iraq, tells me that this is just either it's silly saber-rattling on Donald Trump's part, or if he is actually intent on inserting U.S. military forces, it will be the end of his presidency. It will turn into a military disaster, a debacle. And those officers in the chain of command who go along with this will be guilty of misconduct and of following an unlawful order. This attempt by the Trump administration to bully military officers, who are even those who are now retired, because they simply speak up and point out that in this particular case, what's being done off the coast of Venezuela is illegal. It's not authorized under U.S. law, but it's being done. And when it's being done in the name of the American people, it implicates as well the American people in what I consider to be a war crime. So, I think right now, the Trump administration, despite rattling the saber, despite threatening to attack Venezuela, recognizes that such an attack would put them in a position of being viewed as impotent, because it's not going to cause the collapse of the Venezuelan society or the Maduro government. Even if they kill Maduro, there will be others to step up and take his place. The prospects for a civil war in Ukraine, in Venezuela, at that point would be very significant. So, I think we're going to see Trump try to move for a more negotiated escape plan, to try to cut a deal with Maduro. I don't know if that's possible, but the effort to get Maduro to flee and to give up power in Venezuela, I think, is going to fall short. This isn't strength. It's overreach colliding with reality. Venezuela is too vast, too battle-seasoned for a small offshore force to control. And the lesson from the Iraq War is clear. Toppling is easy. Stabilizing is where empires bleed. If Donald Trump pushes this beyond rhetoric, it wouldn't be a show of power. It would be a self-inflicted disaster. And even removing one man would not erase the resistance behind.